and you'll be asked, you'll get something to ask you if you're okay with that. So hopefully you will be. Usually it will show, can't promise, but it usually just shows the person who's speaking. So good evening. Welcome to the Rabbi Seminar of 2025. I'm so excited to see so many people here, and especially the people who are here. This is the third year of having the Rabbi Seminar. The first year was also about Jews in search of God, but in the earlier centuries, right, in the biblical, Talmudic period, etc. And then I took a break from theology and did a series that was just scattered throughout the year about a deep dive into the holidays and special topics related to the holidays. And now we're back to a continuation of this Jews in search of God. And look, well, what I want to emphasize from the start is really that this class is, even though it's about theology, in other words, ideas about God, right? But it's really about you and me and our community. As we read, if you were reading this book, I think it was in Sacred Fragments, that I can't remember which book it was in yet, but Mordecai Kaplan said that Judaism is about believing, belonging, and becoming. So for a lot of Jews, belonging is the main thing. I'm part of the Jewish people, right? Becoming, I'm trying to do good things in the world, and I'm doing tikkun olam, and I'm religious, and I'm doing different mitzvot. However, not too many Jews really put believing at the top of their hierarchy of what it means to why they're Jewish, why they're committed to being Jewish, which I thought was really interesting. And yet it's so worthwhile because, as you see in the books, if you do read the books, you don't have to, but if you read some of them, the people that are sharing and writing those books, they also went on a faith journey. They also lost faith and found a new and more sophisticated or more, more personal or deliberate kind of encounter with their faith. So that's really what we're here to do. And so I'm now going to show you my slides. Hopefully it will work because, I like my slides. And in fact, it's not showing them. Wait one second. Okay. All right, let's try it again. I guarantee that there will be many awkward moments when we're doing things on Zoom, so I just have to take a deep breath and wait. Try this again. See if I can get my slides. Okay. Yes, there we go. All right. So, ta-da. Our class is Jews in Search of God in the Modern World, the Rabbi Seminar. You're in the right place. And rather than like the first year we did it all in 1 month, it's going to be the third Tuesday of each month, except April, when Passover gets in the middle, so we'll make it the fourth Tuesday. Also, I have to say that these are my own photos, unless otherwise noted, and I picked them because I pick things today that to me represent kind of the mystery of life, that things aren't exactly as they seem. You're not even sure what you're looking at, but it's full of colors and variety and wonder. Today's class will be about how do we talk about God, if we even can, and why we should. And there's a picture there of autumn reflections. And besides doing the nigun that we did at the beginning, I always like to begin with a blessing for the study of Torah. So feel free to join with me or just to answer Amen if you want. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Holy One of blessing, your presence fills creation, who's made us holy with mitzvot and bid us to engage with words of Torah.
Amen.
So my first question, again, relating to what I said at the opening, is why should we engage in theology? In other words, in talking about God, thinking about God. In other words, why are you here tonight? we have hundreds of members in our congregation, and this is a great showing and a great participation, but there's hundreds of people there that chose not to come. I don't know if it's because of the subject matter or something else, but you came. So why is it that you're interested in learning about God or talking about God? And you feel free to put it in the chat, or I want to make it interactive. So of course, you know, we can share aloud, but maybe put in the chat, what brought you here tonight? Ellen, you want to say something? Yeah.
So, hi, everybody. So I can just say I like, and it's nice to talk about God with others who are sort of in the same boat, other people that want to learn about God. There aren't many places in our society where it's comfortable and now safe, to have these conversations. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that even in the Jewish world, again, that's not a topic that we talk about a lot, right? And we have a couple of people wrote in the chat that it's been a spiritual journey. Thank you, Elsa. And I think that, again, if you read the books that I'll show you again, the books I suggest, that even though the authors are rabbis and one's a professor, they also went on the spiritual journey, which is actually one of the most interesting parts of their books. Fran Lebowitz is interested in different views of God. We will be seeing lots of different views of God. Larry Stoller's in retirement. He has time to read and consider these questions. And I do find that a lot, that as we get to a certain age, we are not so busy with demands at home, and we could, or at work, and we can then consider, more philosophical questions. It's also part of spiritual eldering. Marilyn says, Marilyn Walter, I'm trying to feel closer to God. I had my doubts about God when I was younger, but now I feel more spiritual. Great. Thank you for opening up and sharing that. And I think we all have our times of doubts, and we're trying to be spiritual and understand things. Edward says, I am a Jew, but I'm not sure I believe in God. Great, because it's great because that's exactly one of the things we'll be talking about, which is, what does it mean to believe in God, or what does faith mean? Or do you need to believe? Is it a matter of belief or experience? And George says he's considering challenges to his quote in theology. So I think those are all great responses. I really appreciate them, and I appreciate your vulnerability in sharing some of those things. Though now let me take you back to my slides and okay. Second.
I think Leslie Newman had her hand up.
Oh, Leslie, do you want to say something?
I was just going to kind of relate a story. When I was raised in the Reform movement. My sons were raised in the Reform congregation in Wilmington. And I remember my older son having a conversation with our rabbi, Peter Grumbacher, for those of you who know. And he said, how can I be Jewish and not believe in God? And I had become very involved in the organized Jewish community. And I said, Mike, I'm not sure that I'm any different than you. And I think that there's a difference between believing in Jewish values and Jewish culture and Jewish history and all of that, and being so sure of believing in God. And I don't dwell on it, but I am not sure about it.
Well, I appreciate that a lot. Because I think I talked, I think it was this Yom Kippur about faith, and that the biblical idea of faith wasn't belief. People kind of assumed there's a God or there's some power there. But it means faithfulness, or faith in, like, it could be a faith in humanity. It could be a faith in the Jewish people. It could be a faith in yourself and Moses, and, it could be something like that. And definitely Judaism is a religion of deed above creed, right? We would say someone's a good Jew. Sometimes people say to me, like, I'm not a good Jew. And I'm like, what does that even mean? But ways to be a good Jew would usually be by your actions, and usually your actions toward other people, right? Your ethical behavior and the way you make a difference in the world. So, as I said, and again, most Jews don't put belief first. And then again, I try to avoid talking about other religions, but the majority religion in our country is really predicated more on belief. Like somebody who's Christian could say, somebody could be acting in a good Christian way in their point of view, whatever their point of view of that is, but definitely they have to believe to be a Christian. They have certain beliefs. To be a Jew, you don't necessarily have to believe. You're either, we have halachic definitions in Jewish law of who's Jewish, and it doesn't matter really what you believe or even really what you do that makes you Jewish. So, and again, we have one more suggestion here. Pamela studied philosophy a million years ago in college, and she's enjoying the process of becoming Jewish. So she's thinking about this again. And Deborah has a lot. I like this. She's been a member of conservative Orthodox Seaside, which is non-denominational, but it's a little more toward reform in a lot of ways. And so in the Orthodox congregation, you found a deep faith in an active and personal God. And then in the conservative movement, maybe somewhat less. Okay, many congregants who believe in God. Well, that's good. And I don't know if it's being just polite, you didn't say what you found here at Seaside yet. But it's interesting because, well, I don't want to, delay this too much. I want to continue going on with the slides. But sometimes even in the Orthodox world, not everybody is full of faith. Even in the very ultra-Orthodox world, which I've been in, people are often focused on behaviors more than thinking about faith, or the faith, they haven't given it that much thought always. But I'm glad that you found a lot of faith in your Orthodox community. Okay, so now let's continue. Okay. Oh, I wanted to, before I share anything, I wanted to just review a little bit. How many people were in the class the first year, which was about finding God and Jews in search of God in the Bible and Talmud? And so a lot of you were, and I hope some of it stayed with you. And I'd like to review a little bit of the things that we learned then. So we learned that in the Bible, first of all, that the Bible is not just one book, really. We have it as one bound book, but it really represents a library of books from over many centuries, right? And people felt that encounters with God were very real to them, very available, but there were many different concepts about God that could be different from one biblical book to another. Definitely, it has the idea of God as one, that God cares about our actions and commands our righteous behavior with mitzvot, and even made a covenant with the people of Israel. But God gets disappointed and even angry at our failings and has to send the prophets to get us back on track. Then we have rabbinic views of God in the Talmud and the Midrash, where God becomes a lot more personal and kind of parental or fatherly, and even enjoys seeing his human children grow up and think for ourselves. And then we learn that if we make these mistakes, God doesn't need to get angry and smite us or something, but we can do tshuva, we can repent and renew ourselves. There's new interpretations of the biblical names of God, where Adonai becomes the name of God's aspect of mercy and Elohim of God's aspect of judgment. And we have the anthropothetic God. In other words, we project our human feelings onto God, that God feels for us and God cares about us as individuals. And the rabbis did not, unlike the church fathers, they did not have a systematic theology. They didn't argue they argued about everything, but they didn't try to set up a creed, right? That we all have to recite every day. There were just still different views of God. Then we talked in that class about rationalist views like Philo and Maimonides, who were influenced by Greek philosophy, and they tried to give logical proofs of God. For example, if there's a creation, there must be a creator, or there's a great chain of causation, so there must be a first cause. These were not native Jewish ideas, but of course, there's the idea of a creator, but the idea that you need to prove God was not really a Jewish thing. But they began to describe a more transcendent, distant God who could be proven with logic and with philosophy. They also, Maimonides said we can only describe God by God's negative attributes, what God is not. And we cannot at all talk about God having feelings, unlike that God of the rabbis and the Bible. And with Maimonides, he even began to articulate a creed of beliefs like the other majority religions. We talked then about the divine feminine, right? The Shekhinah, these ideas that Jews worshipped goddesses back in ancient times. The goddesses were rejected, but they never really went away because they came back in the form of different feminine metaphors for God. Shekhinah, the divine presence, the feminine motherly God. The Bat Kol, the heavenly voice. Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, all of these were feminine metaphors. And a lot of them are based on the figure of wisdom in the book of Proverbs. And then finally, we talked about the Kabbalistic ideas of God, which is more mystical, experiential. God, again, as Maimonides said, we can't describe God. And the Kabbalah said, yes, God is Ein Sof, a no thing, endless no thingness, not like anything that we can describe. But on the other hand, that divine power has to come into our world through 10 channels known as the Sfirot. So there's this whole inner life of God, just described in the Zohar and other holy books, and that our own soul has different levels, 5 different levels that will journey through, and its journey may be many incarnations to get back to God. So there, in a nutshell, that was about 3,000 years of Jewish thought on God. So I'd like to, before we continue, ask you if there was something in that earlier class that you really stuck with you in the last couple of years since we explored those ideas for the first time. Did it change anything for you taking the class? And you can put it in the chat or you can share it. Well, hopefully it did in some way, and Ben, if you think of it later, you can put it in the chat. Okay, now I go back to my slides. Thank you. Okay. So I'm sharing these books that I recommend people getting, but you do not have to get them, or if you can get them from a library, order them from the library. The one book, Sacred Fragments by Neil Gaiman, is a little more, I guess it's a little more academic than the other 2 books, although it's written for the general reader. And I was so blessed and privileged because years ago I got to take a class, not a full semester class, but a class at a conference with Neil Gaiman, who really opened my ideas up about how to view God. And this book looks at how we recover theology in a modern time when people are not really believers. The book is a little older. You can't get it as an ebook. It's not that old. I know, 35 years old, something like that. And then when I was looking at the books, I was asking some of my female rabbinic colleagues, well, are there any books by women during our first class? And they shared with me these 2 fantastic books that I really recommend. Has anybody gotten any of the books? Anybody? I know some people did because I know like Elsa's been reading them. Okay. So this one is God is Here, Reimagining the Divine. It's kind of a short book. It's very readable. And she talks about different metaphors from nature that are in the Bible and in Jewish thought, that we can see God in different ways. She says, we've only been looking at kind of like strawberry, vanilla, and chocolate, but there's 31 flavors of how we can see God. And of course, this is Reconstructionist. So this is, and she includes a lot of practices that you can do, not just ideas, but how could you incorporate this into your own spiritual practice. And then this last book, so we had Sacred Fragments was the first book, Thinking About God by another female rabbi, Reform rabbi, Carrie Tulling. I'm hoping one of these days we'll get her out here to speak. It's just a very, very readable introduction to Jewish theology. So if you'd like to get that, you can. But I'm going to share a lot of these things in class, so you do not have to purchase these. They're not required textbooks. Okay. And I do have Gabrielle saying, continuity through time stuck with me for the first class. Thank you for teaching us then. Okay. Some of the things continued and some of the things changed, right, through time in Jewish views.
Rabbi,
right.
who was the author of the The
Sorry.
first book?
Oh, it's Neil Gilman,
Uh-huh.
Professor Neil Gilman. He was a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary, so he's from the conservative movement.
Okay.
And he died just a few years ago. So he's a contemporary figure.
Mhm.
And yeah, but I would say it's true, this book, and I already got this as feedback from one of our people in the class, that it is a
Mhm.
little more dense and it's a little more academic than the other two books. Okay. So, but they all describe their own faith journey. Let's go ahead. So here's from Carrie Tulling, who wrote that book on thinking about God. And she asked us, why do we need to talk about God? And do I believe in God? What does it mean to believe in God? So I'd like to ask somebody to read this slide about types of theology. Okay, Carol, you want to read it, Carol Ash?
Mhm.
Thank you.
If I were to ask you to define your own theology, would you know how to answer? Whenever I have asked this question of students in my classes, the theists, persons who believe that God exists in the group, usually speak in experiential terms. They articulate times they felt God was near them. The atheists, persons who believe there is no God, usually speak in material terms. They suggest that science explains all we know, and there is no room for the metaphysical in the universe. Some claim that belief in God is a form of magical thinking. After that initial conversation, however, things get more difficult to articulate. There is more to define than the simple binary of does God exist, not exist. There are quite a few options, actually. Rabbi Kari Tulling.
Thank you. So that's interesting. For those who would say, I'm a theist, let's say, instead of saying, I'm not an atheist, I'm a theist. I feel some connection to God. Would you describe it in terms of, I believe in God, I think there's some higher power, or I've experienced something I call God in my life, something like that, some mystery, some sanctity, I don't know. So taking well, you don't have to come out as a theist or atheist here, or an agnostic, but for those who do consider yourself in that camp of those who are, if you want to call it believers or theists, is your connection to God based more on experience, or on you've given it some thought and it just makes sense to you? Anybody want to share thought? Okay. Carol?
So I've given this a lot of thought.
Yeah.
and a lot of reading.
Uh-huh.
And a lot of meditation. And I'm a Rabbi Rami God lover. Because Rami, in his
Shapiro,
book God,
Rabbi Rami
Shapiro,
Shapiro.
I'm sorry, Rabbi Rami Shapiro.
Yeah.
I believe that I'm a panentheist, where I believe that God is everything, that every animal, every person, we all have God within us. And when I am seeking an answer to a problem or a pain in my heart, I can go to God within in meditation time. And I have experienced the God within. And I really count that as my belief in God. And when I look out the window, I can see God in absolutely everything. I can take a walk and look at something and say, oh, there's God. The birds, the flower. I mean, I feel very connected to the God of my choice.
That is great. Then we'll be looking at some of these different types of belief in God. So when you say panentheism, it's the idea like God is in everything. But when we say the N, instead of just saying pantheism, everything is God. Panentheism is everything's part of God, that there's some transcendent dimensions too that we can't understand, but God's filling everything. So you find God in everything. And I thought it was interesting because you said inside of you, that so that it sounds like it liberated you to have a different way to think about God than that our Father, our King on the holy throne up there somewhere.
Yeah, that wasn't working for me.
No, well, we'll see. That doesn't work for a lot of people. Gabrielle and Bill.
Thank you. To answer about God, when there are coincidences, which is what Bill will call them, I know it's God.
Mhm.
And they're happening every day, all the time. And I guess there's a thought process over years that allows for the best decision to be made
Mm.
by observing a little more than what's right around me. But there's something about coincidences that
Interesting. Yeah.
over and over and over, it's definitely God. I mean, it's, to me, it's inarguable.
So that somebody said, I hope somebody knows who said this quotation. Coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous. Did anyone ever hear that one? You can Google it and tell me. Anyway, whoever they said it probably isn't the person.
Mark Twain, probably.
Okay, I don't know, but yes, that or what Jung,
I have to
Carl
go
Jung
to the
called the meaning
bathroom.
synchronicity, which is a meaningful
Oh.
meaningful coincidence, and finding those things in our life that add some kind of sense of mystery or awe. By the way, people need to be on mute, so and maybe our helpers will mute people. Okay. Okay. So, but neither of you said, like, I sat down and I thought about, what's the ultimate cause, the mover that moves the other thing, or I looked in a microscope and I saw God. It was more like I can feel it when I meditate, when I pray, there's something there, or I see it out in nature, or meaningful, mysterious things happen in my life that just set me on the right course. So I feel God, right? Okay. George, were you raising your hand? Great.
Yes. So want to leave the word and the concept of religion aside.
Yes.
It's a matter of faith or belief. Hal
Mhm.
Cohn and I, during the early days of our participation together in Musa, spent weeks, months trying to figure out God. And Hal and I were coming at it from different ways. He was struggling
Okay.
more with it emotionally and
Mhm.
faith and even religiosity.
Mhm.
I decided to resolve the dynamic for me is to simply acknowledge that God is. That's it. God is. And I think in Gilman's book, the last chapter is write your own theology.
Yes.
And
Okay.
several years ago, I started to do that around this concept of God is, and then to accept the mystery.
Mhm.
I,
Mhm.
I, I accept, I believe in the Darwinian
Okay.
process. I believe there's a lot of scientific, rational things, I believe. I believe that there are volcanoes and tsunamis, which Alan Fruman says God's not finished yet. So we got all this change still going on. So God is always. That's my point of view.
Thank you, George. Thank you very much. And in fact, during that first class on God, I did send something out about how to write your own personal theology, and maybe I'll update that and send that out again. So I appreciate that. And we have Einstein said that they quote I always say attributed to him because everything brilliant Einstein said it, I don't know, but perhaps he really did. Sounds very smart, so he probably did say it. Okay, yeah.
Think.
I still think it sounds like Mark Twain.
Okay. All right. Well, let's continue then. All right. Mhm. Okay. So here are some different kinds of theology, again, that Rabbi Towing has in her book, including the one that Carol mentioned. And most of these have been in Judaism, maybe not all of them. First of all, animism. All things are alive in some way, and they may actually be gods. More like this is more like indigenous religion. Okay. Does that exist in Judaism? There's elements of that, like in Kabbalah, I would say, like that everything has some life force in it, but not necessarily that everything's a god. Dualism, two powers are in conflict. Not a lot of that in Judaism, right? Monolatry, there's a lot of gods, but our God is the one that we worship. And maybe early Jews did, we learned that in the class on biblical theology, that maybe early Jews did think that way, because don't we say, Micha mocha ba'elim Adonai, God who is like you among the gods. So apparently they still acknowledged other gods, but there was just ours is ours. And now we get to things that are more part of Judaism. Monotheism, obviously the Jewish contribution to world theology, not to say that we were the only ones who believe that, but we popularized this concept of monotheism, right? The idea of one God is whatever that means to us, a unity, unified, unique. And then pantheism, this is in the thought of Spinoza a lot, that God is sort of the sum of everything. And our congregant here, Lawrence Larry Stoller, who's here, right? He's going to be teaching about Spinoza. So I'm going to leave it up to him, because he knows a lot more about that than I do, and he teaches about Jewish philosophy. Panentheism that Carol mentioned is everything is filled with godliness. So everything you see is God. God's in me, God's in you, but God is also like transcending that. Like the rabbi said this in the Talmud, the place that like the world is in God, but the world is not God's place. Okay. Mysticism is that God is present and close and immanent. We experience God. And rationalism is we want to prove logically that there's a God who is usually very transcendent and somewhat distant to us. So there's so many different types of theology. And what difference does all of this make at all? Why should we even care about it? So another quotation to be read, and maybe Herschelers, can you call on somebody to read this? Someone's got their hand up. Do you have
Ellen,
anybody that wants to read? Okay.
did you have your hand up?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
What difference does it make what we think of God? Why should we care about theology? What difference really does it make if we think of God as a bearded gentleman or as an invisible force? Why should it matter whether someone thinks this or that the event is the will of God? Theology defines what is possible in our lives. To give an example, if you believe in miracles, then miracles can happen in your life. And if you do not, then they cannot. This is not a form of magical thinking, but a statement about the role of belief. Our conceptions shape the contours of our world. So your decision as to whether or not miracles are possible determines whether or not events will qualify as miracles for you. Your theology, in other words, sets limits, expansive or restrictive, of what is possible in your world. Rabbi Carrie Tooling. Oh,
So
okay.
that's interesting. Just chew on that for a bit. If you believe in miracles, miracles can happen to you because you interpret things that happen to you as a miracle. And if you don't believe that way, it could be you might interpret something as a big stroke of luck or just something you can't explain, right? But if you have this kind of belief, then you're kind of inviting, it's the window, the frame with which you look at reality. So as Gabrielle and Bill were saying, that if you believe things happen in a meaningful way and the coincidences are God's way of, giving you guidance, then that's how it works for you. I really thought a lot about this in 2020 with the pandemic, because as soon as it happened, I mean, there was so much theology going on trying to make sense of it. Well, this is God's punishment for all the, bad things we're doing, which I heard that from the the different polar opposites of theology. Like some would say, because our world has become so liberal, and others would say, no, because we're abusing the environment. And people wanted to have reasons, they want to have interpretations. And for other people, it would just be, well, it's something medical that happened, about every 100 years there's been a pandemic in the world, so it was time for it to happen. And it happened because of things that we could investigate. We really make our own meaning, right? We decide, and that can influence us a lot. I think too, people that have loss have to make meaning of it, which is all of us at some time or another. I think when my mother, and I've shared my mother's memoir when she became a widow at the age of 46 because my father was killed in an accident. She really took this big, leap of faith that she felt that there were mysterious things that happened that she wrote about, but in a sense, she didn't think it didn't make it all nice and easy and because she accepted it was God's will, but it was something like there's a bigger picture. She used different metaphors, like there's a big tapestry, I'm one thread of it. Sometimes I only see the back, but somehow it's making a bigger picture that I don't understand. I'm privileged to be a Jew, and I'm not going to worry about anything because the worst thing I worried about happened, so I'm going to get out there and help other people. Just it transformed her. And other, some people went through the Holocaust and became broken, and other people went through it and said there was a reason I survived, or they had whatever they explained to themselves helped them to move on. So that's a question. Any thoughts about this, that what we believe makes things possible? Have you ever thought about that? Yeah. And you can write it in, or you can Susan Towers. Yeah.
Yeah, I think perception is so important in everything.
Mhm.
And then how we perceive something is in how we go forward. And any of us can experience the same thing and see it differently and either be sad and bitter or just move on.
Mhm.
And I think it gets to one of these, this one idea I think I've read in Judaism where, it's whatever, if you do something good, you'll be taken care of, you'll be rewarded. If you do something negative, you're going to be punished. So when somebody good, something horrible happens, it's, you get kind of lost.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for me, I just think I won't use the word I normally use, but just things happen and there's no reason for them.
Yeah.
And you just move on. I don't know. And I think that's perception.
Yeah,
Well, that's going to be our last class is about ideas of theodicy, which is, in other words, if you uphold this idea that God is good and there is a God and they've made a good world, then why does all this bad stuff happen, right?
well,
And we'll look at different modern ideas, so I don't want to get too into that right now, but definitely, as I said, you interpret and you make meaning for yourself of what's happening. And we'll see with, like Viktor Frankl said, that's kind of your last choice. When he was even when he was in concentration camps, he said the choice was how he saw himself on the inside, or the meaning that he made of his desperate situation. And luckily he survived and he was able to create a whole kind of psychology. Hirschler's, do you want to say, David?
Yeah, just reacting to, I thought Susan's comment just now about perception was really interesting, important. I think perception actually has a lot to do with how the world functions, how humans function. Unfortunately, I think that perception can also get people into a lot of trouble because it might prevent them from understanding facts and from recognizing facts. So it's sort of a two-edged sword when you
Yes.
think about it. But it's also an incredibly important aspect of human behavior.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We got some more thoughts in the chat from Gabrielle and Bill, wondering about perceptions and ways to better understand and empathize with others' perceptions. Very good point. When we see there's a lot of different theologies in the world, you have to think that based on people's life experiences and their education, they're going to see the world, with a different frame. And this is causing a lot of the problems we have today because we can't see the other person's point of view. And Marilyn Walter says, I think there's an element of randomness that cannot be explained. That's why I'm searching for God to explain the randomness. Great. I want to get to that because, in fact, I heard Rabbi Carrie Tolling speak, and we were talking about chaos theory and the chaos that exists in creation. And maybe that'll come along later in the class, especially as we get to that last class. But for now, I'd like to turn back to the language we use to describe God. And I will say, and I guess it is a spoiler if you haven't read the book, which most people haven't, but we use a lot of metaphorical language, right? And we use metaphorical language in everyday speech. And Tova Spitzer in her book says, she quotes another thinker, James Geary, who described that there's different kinds of metaphors, right? Metaphors saying something is like, basically, something's like something else, right? Maybe not with the word like. And he said that there are three kinds of metaphors that we find. There's active, dormant, and extinct. So there's your volcano. In the active category are metaphors that strike us as lively and evocative, like a poet, Mary Oliver's beautiful phrasing, like the dark hug of time. That's a beautiful new metaphor. Dormant ones are ones that we recognize are metaphors, but they become cliches, like I'm up a creek without a paddle. And I won't use that word. I'm up the creek without a paddle. It's something we know, it's a cliche. We know it's a metaphor. And what he called extinct metaphors, it's a little confusing term, but it's metaphors that are so ingrained in our society that we don't realize they are metaphors and we think they are literal truth. Okay. For example, we say, I see what you mean, but we're not seeing what they mean. That's really a metaphorical language, right? It's understanding, but we take it for granted. And those metaphors can shape the way we say that we think of things. Think of this. We say things like, I need to kill some time. Or I'm going to spend time. Well, those are metaphors and they can influence the way we see time in a kind of a negative way, right? I noticed that my yoga teacher that I have would use a lot of, she'd use like gun metaphors, like, are you locked and loaded to do this pose? And I always thought, that doesn't make me feel peaceful and feel like it's yoga. But we just unconsciously have these extinct metaphors that we don't even realize that we're using, and we use them a lot, right? My computer it doesn't have virus, I hope, but it doesn't actually have a virus, but we're using that as a metaphor for certain things. So, of course, the most pervasive one of these so-called extinct metaphors is when we say the word God, because we have all kinds of associations that we now think are God. And that is, and she puts this in big print, God is a big, powerful person. That's the way we're taught to see about God. Our Father, our King, Master of the universe, big, powerful person. And if you believe, we think we must believe in that metaphor. That's not God. That's a traditional metaphor, or a series of traditional metaphors for God as a king, God as a monarch, things we can't really relate to. And then we go, well, if I don't believe in that, I'm not a believer. But maybe what you need is a better metaphor. So let's again turn to this. So see some other ideas, other ways we can think about God. Okay. Sorry, trying again. Sometimes okay, here we go. I think I've got it. I think I've got it. All right, so I'll read you this one. Why are we engaging in Jewish theology at all today? Why is this becoming available to us today? Is that Jewish theology tends to become more active at times that there's two factors taking place. One is that we're living in an ideologically open social setting like we have in our country, like we have in our world today. And the other thing is that there's been a major turning point in Jewish history, frequently, alas, a historical trauma. And this describes our day. We are part of a greater world, and we need to explain our beliefs to others and understand others' beliefs. And of course, we have been through one of the or we've just been born maybe just after one of the biggest traumas in Jewish history, the Holocaust, and we're still continuing to face traumas like October 7th. So we need to explain them with theology. And we also want to keep some of the more ancient metaphors alive. So the reason he named his book Sacred Fragments is based on an Agadah or a Midrash, and it's also in the Talmud, that when Moses smashed the tablets and he made new tablets, as we're going to be reading the book of Exodus, both of those were in the ark, the whole tablets, the new tablets, and the smashed up old tablets. So as Jews, we don't want to just get rid of the past, right? We want to keep the fragments of the past and realize they're sacred, but we don't have to believe them anymore. You don't have to see God as a king on a throne or as your heavenly father, right? You can see or experience or think or relate to God in totally different ways. And that's a Jewish practice that's as ancient as the Midrash. We've been making myth, we've been making Midrash as our way to understand the world. We can keep those metaphors from the past, but we can give them like new modern interpretation. And so let's see some more about that. So can I have somebody read this if you can see it? Can you see this? Someone would like to read about, as again, this is Professor Gilman on symbolic language.
Bill will, if you want.
Okay, Bill, please read that.
The theological literal mindedness is idolatrous, not because it claims to describe the transcendent God in human and natural terms, but rather because it insists that these descriptions are literally accurate and true. Exodus 24:5 forbids us from making and worshiping any sculpted image. The problem is not sculpted images, however, but rather conceptual and linguistic images. We must speak about God, and we must also recognize that all of our God talk is built on a skeleton of metaphors, constructs, models, paradigms, or more technically, symbols.
So now our idolatry is, we're not making little statues and putting them up and bowing to them, but we are constructing ideas of God in our mind, which is fine. We have to do that, or we risk just having some big blob that, that we can't try to think about God at all. But we have to remember that whatever we say about God is a metaphor. We're trying to use our human language to describe what's indescribable. And I do remember so well learning directly from Professor Gilman about this when I was at the Cage conference many years ago, conference for Jewish educators. And he said, we really use metaphors all the time. And so this doesn't mean like God's make believe or something, but it's like we use our language to talk about things that are like God. And some of those metaphors don't work for us anymore. And here's it from another book of his. And I really, by the way, I love this picture because my daughter, who is not like to be shown in a picture, but you can't see her face, is looking at this amazing scene. And when we look out at the world, we kind of discover the patterns we want, and we discover God, and then we invent the metaphors to describe it. We experience something, or as my teacher, Reb Zalman, said, religion, or we could say theology, is the afterthought of the believer. Or we could say the theology is the afterthought that we have trying to describe something that was maybe a wordless feeling or an experience, and now we're trying to capture it in words. Can somebody read this one for us, please? There's someone who'd like to read. Leslie Newman.
Okay. Human beings discover God and then invent metaphors to characterize the God they experience. There is no way of proving objectively and conclusively that God exists. For centuries, philosophers have tried to devise such proofs, but with little success. To perceive God, then, one has to, 1, want to make sense of the world, and 2, believe that this ultimate canvas is in fact an integrated whole. 3, believe that the world does cohere and make sense. And 4, believe that the reason it does cohere, in fact, the very principle of its coherence, is the existence of a reality we call God, and that this God, can be seen in and through our experiences of the world. God is not an object, but more like a pattern that suffuses all things. God is elusive. That's precisely why we need the range of metaphors to bring this God sharply into our consciousness.
Well, there's
Me-
so much there to think about. And this is another book by him, The Way into Encountering God in Judaism, that this idea of God is not a person. So we'll see this more when we're learning about Mordecai Kaplan, the idea of God as a power, a force, but here he says a pattern that suffuses everything, that makes it cohere, that helps us make sense of the world. We sense that something's there, and then we try to use metaphorical language to describe that. But are our metaphors alive? And this is, sorry, one of my favorite pictures. I got a little bit psychedelic here. Would somebody like to read this? And I'll just let you try to figure out what the picture is. No, it's a reflection in the
Our
autumn.
God,
So it's, yeah,
are
somebody want to
God
read?
metaphors alive?
Thank you, Ed.
What is the most powerful about, what is most powerful about so-called extinct metaphors is that they're not really extinct at all. Quite the opposite. We take them so for granted that we think they're describing reality as it is. They are metaphors we live by. What I am suggesting here is that for many, many people, God has become an extinct metaphor. Regardless of what we say we believe or don't believe, when most of us say the word God, what we're referring to is actually a metaphor. God is a big, powerful person. What we then profess to believe or disbelieve is that metaphor.
I had read that before, but I think it's worth repeating that. Think if that's what you came away with today, that I'll know that you got something from this class, that it's not believing in God or not, but it's, do you believe in this, that this metaphor, this conventional metaphor for God is actually, is something that has a concrete existence that you have to accept or reject? Or do you see that in fact it's poetic language, it's metaphorical language? And then finally, Toba Spitzer had this great story about how when she was younger, she worked at Baskin Robbins ice cream place, and they had 31 flavors, and a little kid came in and was like, what he couldn't read yet, so he's like, what are the flavors? And the dad said chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, because he didn't want the kid to, he knew his kid, I guess, would be there deciding all day long which ice cream. But she thought, but that was kind of sad because the kid didn't get to try, all the other wonderful flavors. And we tend to have given ourselves a limited metaphor of a limited menu, of these metaphors or symbols or poetic symbols, whatever you want to call them, for God. So many of us reject these hierarchical, patriarchal God metaphors like king, Lord, judge, father, master of the universe. Now, admittedly, some of these are in our prayers. That makes it hard, but leave that for another night. And then she has in the book, God is Here, Reimagining the Divine. She goes to our sources. So again, to the fragments, the sacred fragments of our tradition, I don't know if I should say fragments, but into the well springs of our tradition, and she finds nature metaphors that we could reinvigorate, as powerful ways that we relate to the divine. For example, water is a metaphor for Torah. It's a metaphor for God. It's life-giving. It's flowing. It's the depths of the sea. It's the hidden wells, right? We could call God Hamakom, the place. And I know some of our chanters like that because they chant Haman Hamakom Hazeh. How awesome is this place? The words of Jacob, and when he awoke from his dream of the heavenly ladder. And the rabbis use that word in the Talmud. Hamakom, the place, is the name for God. So sacred places. A voice. Is it a voice? Our inner voice, the still small voice within calling to us. Is it a prophetic voice that connects us to God? Our rock, something that gives us solidity and gives us an anchor in difficult times. The cloud, God is compared in the Torah to a cloud, or God's presence comes in a cloud. It's the mystery, the unknowing, those moments of transition. And again, holy fire can be our zealousness for righteous causes. And then she uses that from the Yud He Vav He, as we learned in our original class we've talked about in service is the sacred name, the tetragrammaton is this, God says, I will be what I will be, the power to always become and to always be changing. That could also be a way to see God. So there's so many, and those are just some of them, but her book gives you a lot of different practices you can do. And she also tells a lot about her own story, difficult things that she went through in her life. And she talks about when her wife had cancer, breast cancer, and she just talks about a lot of different things. So you can read this if you are on a spiritual journey, and it's a smaller, easier to read book. So as we're getting towards the top of the hour, we're almost done, but I wanted to just ask you, what do you think about this idea of metaphors for God? And have you ever thought about what metaphor? I'm not saying you have one metaphor for God in your whole lifetime, but is there one that you reject, you're not comfortable with? And are there some that in fact enliven you, that as ways either to think about God or to do spiritual practices or to meditate or just to find some kind of meaning? And if you don't have that, do you want to explore it? So do we have anyone who hasn't spoken yet at all that wants to say something? Okay.
Sure.
Okay. Elsa.
Yeah. So I think, at least from my upbringing with religion, I always thought of it of God as all of those metaphors as our Father, our King type of thing, and I think as you start to think about religion and God, then you start to think in other terms that you're not thinking about somebody who is making decrees and all that, but you just see the miracles of life of every day. When you talked about miracles, I have seen so many things that I can only call a miracle, and then you have no other explanation for why these things happen except to say it has to be a God. So is it so? So that's when you, I guess, start to think in terms of. I never thought about using other words. I have been reading Rabbi Toba Spitzer's book about the God with all the metaphors, and starting to think in those terms that explaining God is actually something else.
Thank you. And I know you talked about seeing different miracles happen, and even as a physician, sometimes things can't be explained.
I just had this discussion yesterday with my doctor. There are miracles.
And she does talk about nature metaphors, which I like a lot because, I'm the nature rabbi here. And on my website, wellspringsofwisdom.com, I have a lot of the same metaphors. I go into depth about them, but I think she does it in a more explicitly theological way. Like, this is talking about God, where I'm saying, well, let's talk about your soul. It's talking about your journey, etc. Now we got some more folks that want to talk. Larry Stoller.
What?
Oh, wait, you're muted, Larry. Can you unmute?
Yes, I am.
Yes. Okay. No, you're still muted. There's something happening. You're being muted.
Hit it. There we go.
Don't touch anything. Yes.
All right. What I'm struck by, or I've thought about in this discussion, is sort of Maimonides on the one side of an idea as simply not comprehensible to us.
Yes.
And on the other side, language is all we have.
Yes.
Human concepts are all we can do.
Yes.
And that gap is mind-boggling. We have to make do with what we have, and maybe that brings us to some kind of approximation. But I'm struck by some of the limits to that as well. No matter how poetic or insightful our metaphors, we're still well short of understanding.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know you're studying and teaching a lot about different Jewish philosophers, and we did learn a little about Maimonides in the first time I taught about this, that you know, he was insistent that you can't talk about God in any positive way, only about what God isn't. God is beyond us, but that's also limiting. And yet he loved God and said, you have this love and passion for God. And most people can't be like a Maimonides. I think we have to, as my teacher Reb Zalman would say, in a way, we're putting a mask on God so we can talk to God. Otherwise, it's like God, as he said, a Protestant theologian, was sort of a theology joke, I guess. The guy said he didn't want to talk about God, so he said, well, when I pray to God, I just see an oblong blur. Well, that's no fun, right? We want to somehow connect. We have to connect emotionally. And if God made us this way, it must be for a reason, if you want to put it like that. So I appreciate that. And George, do you want to say something?
Thank you. Just a word. When we started
Okay.
off here, I said I wanted my theology to be challenged.
Okay.
And so my theology is God is. And then listening to this conversation about metaphor,
Yes.
I guess I didn't want to have to make choices among the metaphors.
Right.
It is.
All right. Okay.
And
Well, that's it. Like Harvey and Ellen wrote there, Echia Asher Echia, I will be what I will be. God is. Yud He Vav He. God was, is, will be. That's your God. And maybe you don't want any sort of picture of God, but remember that those things are not, if we say that is God, like that rock is God, then we would be worshiping it. We would be making a graven image, but we could say God is like that because I feel secure with God. God is like a shepherd because God is like guiding me, right? God is like a king because I feel this awe and majesty when I stand at the Grand Canyon. If you use it like that, then it's not a graven image, and it can be ever changing, like a kaleidoscope. I just want to look in the chat. Yes.
Hashem is a great word for me to use.
Hashem, the name.
The name.
Yes.
Right.
Okay. I like that because it's the name for all those things that I can't even say the name. And let's see,
Stan Newman wants to say something.
Okay,
I think.
Stan, what do you want to say?
It's Carol.
Well, Carol, what do you want to say?
Well, I guess I've had a lot of mixed. I don't have one concept of God. It's kind of varied. I once felt like I had a spiritual experience of God. On the other hand, I cannot make sense of the Holocaust, and that gets in the way of everything. Why the Holocaust? Why October 7th? And it's a constant struggle with me, and I can't integrate I can view God as the beauties of nature. But then I got back to the Holocaust and now October 7th, and I can't integrate it.
Well, I hope we'll explore that more, especially as we get into really throughout the class, but especially in the last class. But definitely this is one reason that Jews are estranged from theology. They're still angry at God, or if they believe in God, or else it's like, well, where were you? And thank you. This is something we all struggle with, all of us. Yes. And the Rosens, one of you wants to say something. Okay.
So I can really relate to what Carol was saying, and I don't know if this is a metaphor or not, but I see the divine as an expectation. That the expectation is that you're put on this earth and you are supposed to do good. You're supposed to do the right thing. And I think it's the disappointment of people who don't do that. That the challenge that is given to us by the divine is to rise above every challenge, every Holocaust, every October 7th, the dying of one's child, or whatever it is. The expectation is that you will rise to that occasion and you will do good. And I think that's a hard road to go.
Thank you, Sarah. That's that's another. I never thought of using the word expectation as a metaphor for God, but I think that's a great one to really struggle with. and wrestle with. You know, Rabbi Arthur Waska said, Israel, the name Israel, of course it means, the Torah says it means wrestle with God, and we are the God wrestlers. So you don't have to like believe or accept all these ideas, but you should wrestle with them. That's what makes you an Israel, a Jew. So I'm going to wrap up and thanking everybody for your contributions. We have some more things in the chat. We have the divine energy. I like that too, from Ellen, as a metaphor for God, because we'll see ideas of God as a force rather than a being. There are so many things in life, there's no logical reason to so belief in a beneficial father helps explain that can't. And then you're challenged with, and then what about the other side of things that, you know, Sarah just brought up? How do you, or so other, or Carol Newman brought that up too, like how, if you accept that God gave you the good, then what about all the other things? So we'll continue to ponder this, and it'll be part of our class as we go along. And now I just want to show you what we have coming up. So that's the last slide. Okay, which is we have coming up, hold on, my favorite turtle, my favorite turtle photos. So we'll be on Tuesday evenings, on the third Tuesday, except in April when it's on the fourth Tuesday. And in March, it'll be about rationalism in a secular age, or as I call it, God makes sense. If I can't think of enough rational things to say, then I'll put something else there. And in April, empiricism or mysticism, I sense God, is the way I like to say it. And May 20th, existentialism, religious existentialism, my life makes sense with God. And then we'll keep pursuing this idea of theodicy, but then why does all this stuff happen in the world? And why does the good things happen? And as to what Sarah just said about why do people, it's so disappointing when people don't live up to that. When Carrie Tulling had this, Rabbi Tulling had this beautiful phrasing for this. She said, like, our belief in God is like a belief in a moral coherence. That's her new view of God, a moral coherence to the world. So when people violate that moral coherence and, you know, become agents of chaos, that becomes very disturbing. It's not merely that I think somebody's breaking a rule or something. It's like this, a bigger picture. That's part of our idea of God. So I appreciate all your comments and all that you're bringing. I hope you'll keep on this journey with us for the next few months as we learn about and become Jews in search of God. I'm going to turn off the recording and thank you.
Yasher Koach.